Have you ever had a cut that became red, swollen, and filled with pus? Or maybe you've had chickenpox, but like most people, you've only had chickenpox once. In order to explain these experiences, we're going to take a close look at the immune system. The job of the immune system is to fight off pathogens that might want to attack and invade and take over your body. Your body's first line of defense against pathogens such as bacteria or viruses are barriers that prevent the pathogens from getting in your body in the first place. Let's take a quick look at some of these barriers. The first and most obvious barrier is your skin, which does a pretty good job of keeping pathogens out. Of course, your skin doesn't cover every single part of your body. You have openings such as the respiratory tract. Pathogens might try to get in through your nose or through your mouth, but fortunately, your trachea and the rest of your respiratory tract is lined with mucus and cilia that can trap pathogens and sweep them back out of your body. Another way pathogens could get into your body is through the digestive tract. Bacteria could be on your food, but fortunately, the stomach acid in your stomach will kill most of those microorganisms. Another danger zone is prevented by fever. Fever can denature the enzymes and pathogens and prevent them from taking over. Your eyes are an opportunity for pathogens to get into your body, but fortunately your tears contain mucus and other secretions such as enzymes that can fight off the pathogens. Similarly, your saliva contains enzymes as well. Sometimes, though, pathogens get past that first line of defense. For example, if you get a cut to your skin. Now the pathogens have a way into your body and we need a second line of defense. This is known as inflammation or the inflammatory response. What happens when you get a cut is that a chemical alarm known as histamine will go off inside your body. And that chemical alarm, histamine, will cause white blood cells to rush to the area. Remember that white blood cells are carried by the circulatory system in blood vessels. As these white blood cells swarm the infected area, the veins get bigger and swell. This is known as vasodilation. And these white blood cells have a fancy name. They're called phagocytes because they like to do phagocytosis. They surround the pathogen, in this case bacteria, engulf it, and eat it. Unfortunately, sometimes the second line of defense is not enough either, and so we need to call in the big guns. The third line of defense, and the final line of defense, is your immune response. And it involves a whole army of specialized white blood cells. Keep in mind that a fancy word for white blood cells is leukocytes. So anytime you see leukocytes, don't be thrown off, it just means white cells. For our purposes, we're going to focus on a type of white blood cell known as the lymphocytes, specifically B cells and T cells. Let's take a look at how these different white blood cells work together to protect the body. First of all, where do these white blood cells come from? They're produced in the bone marrow. They start as stem cells, and those stem cells will develop into immature lymphocytes. Some of those lymphocytes will become B cells. But other lymphocytes might travel via the blood to an organ called the thymus, and those will develop into T cells. So the T refers to thymus, and the B refers to bone marrow. Now, one of the big problems for your immune system is recognizing pathogens. They need a way to figure out which cells are good human cells and which cells are bad foreign cells. Well, pathogens have proteins and polysaccharides on their surface, known as antigens, and your body will recognize these antigens as signs of a foreign invader. And that will trigger the immune response. And your body makes a structure known as an antibody. This is a defensive protein, and it's the antibody that actually binds to and recognizes those antigens on a pathogen. So one way to remember the difference between these two things is that the antigen is on the pathogen, and your body makes the antibody. These antibodies are crucial because once they attach to the antigen, they have labeled it for destruction. They can also help neutralize pathogens. As we see in this picture, the antibodies have bound to the antigen on the pathogen, and by doing so, they're preventing the pathogen from getting into blood cells or other cells of your body. Where do these antibodies come from? Well, they're made by the B cells. Once the B cells make antibodies, the antibodies can bind to the antigens. And if you look closely at this picture, you'll see that each B cell is specific. Each B cell can recognize one particular type of pathogen and that antigen that's on that pathogen. It's kind of like enzymes and substrates. So this particular B cell will only recognize and bind to the antigens of this pathogen. The older you get and the more diseases you're exposed to, the more pathogens your B cells learn to recognize. So the point of labeling those pathogens for destruction is to allow macrophages, which are white blood cells that like to eat pathogens, to come in and do their job. Once a pathogen, like this one, has been labeled by antibodies, the macrophage will be able to come in, engulf it, and destroy it. And here you can see in this picture that the macrophage is surrounding the pathogen with pseudopods, fake feet. Once it does that, the pathogen is inside the macrophage and it can now digest and destroy it. In order to make this happen, T cells, known as helper T cells, will activate the B cells and deactivate them. And the great thing about this process is once B cells have labeled antigens for destruction, those B cells will become memory cells, and they will remember that pathogen should it come back in the future. And this is one method of developing immunity. Every time those B cells encounter a new pathogen and make memory cells, your body has a better chance of fighting them in the future. So let's put this all together. We've got a team effort going on with many different white blood cells. We'll start off with the B cell, which again makes the antibodies that can bind to the antigens on the pathogens. Oftentimes, that B cell needs to be activated by a helper T cell. Once that happens, the B cell can become plasma cells and memory cells so that they can later fight the infection. The plasma cell makes antibodies that bind to more of the pathogens. And now that those pathogens have been labeled and marked for destruction, a macrophage can come along, eat it, and destroy it. And of course, we have memory cells after all this happens that will remember the pathogen should it come back and try to invade again. So we've seen that macrophages, with the help of B cells, T cells, and antibodies, can destroy pathogens. But what about human cells that are already infected by the pathogens? Well, this is the domain of killer T cells. Killer T cells' job is to kill your own cells that have either been infected by viruses, bacteria, or might be cancer cells. These are also known as cytotoxic T cells because they're toxic to your cells. And the way the killer T cells work is by using a protein known as perforin. Here, a cytotoxic T cell has recognized an infected cell of your body. It's recognized it because the infected cell is displaying some of those foreign antigens. So the cytotoxic T cell produces perforin. And what perforin does is it pokes holes in the infected cell. Enzymes can then enter those holes, and the enzymes force the cell to commit suicide. So in this way, the killer T cell, through hand-to-hand combat, is able to take care of any cells that might be infected. And this is important because if the cells remain infected, they provide the opportunity for pathogens to continue to grow and reproduce within the body. So let's put this all together and see how it leads to acquired immunity. The first time you get exposed to a pathogen, your body makes antibodies to it. But because it's the first time, it takes it a little while and it doesn't make as many antibodies very quickly. The second time, however, you get exposed to that pathogen, your body remembers it because of those memory B cells. So, in the same amount of time, it can make much more antibodies and quickly defeat it. So many times you may be exposed to a pathogen a second time around and not even know it because your immune system is so efficient at defeating it. So to sum up, we just looked at two branches of immunity. The first branch was innate immunity. These were the barriers and the inflammatory response that are used to fight off any type of pathogen. They're very general. Then we looked at acquired immunity, which was specific and dependent on exposure to pathogens in the past. And the acquired immunity involved your antibodies and white blood cells, like T cells, B cells, and macrophages. In class, we'll take this a little bit further and take a look at things like vaccines, antibiotics, and how AIDS affects the immune system.